If I wanted somebody in my life to come back and be reincarnated, what do I need to do? How do I need to prepare them to come back as somebody that I want in my life?
Yeah. Are you talking about people who are already dead or before they
People who
die?
pass, and you miss them. How can I get them to come back to me? Do I need to bury them a certain way? Are there rituals?
No, no, none of that. We don't see there's no difference between if somebody is cremated or burial or how the body
Yeah.
is disposed of. It doesn't seem to have any relation to anything. If you have an opportunity to talk to them before they die, you can let them know how you feel. You want them to come back to you. And there are these cases where people plan before they die where they want to be reborn. It actually is a
How?
thing.
How? Can you please explain to me one of those cases?
There's one Brazilian case where a girl she was forbidden twice from marrying men that she was in love with. Her father just would not let her. So she basically essentially killed herself by contracting tuberculosis intentionally. And meanwhile, she told her best friend that she was going to come back to her. This is one of Stevenson's cases. In 20 cases suggestive of reincarnation. The kid came back, in the family where that she had said, and she recalled, the life that she had left before. I mean, it's
Wow.
one of these cases with verified things. There are a number of them like this. We find them particularly in tribal societies.
What do you say when people probably say to you, Jim, that's crazy? No way. What do you say to that?
Look at the cases. I mean, I think that I'm data led, right? I mean, I didn't start with a belief in reincarnation, then go start looking for evidence for it.
Mm.
I was intrigued by the idea and started reading Stevenson. And the more I read, I thought, this is kind of interesting. And the more I read and the more I began to see the patterns and began to understand it, the more interesting I got, right? There are a lot of these cases that have been studied. So, yeah, I mean, it's easy to reject this if you haven't looked at the data. It's not so easy if you have. And I think that's tied to a growing recognition that the materialist ideas about consciousness being generated by the brain are breaking down. There are more and more people realizing that just does not work. Once that door is opened, once people realize consciousness is not generated by the brain, that maybe consciousness is separate from the body, right? Once you've made that leap, right, then it's much easier to say, okay, consciousness could survive death, consciousness could be reincarnated, right? So it's changing, and it's becoming, people are becoming more and more open to this, and it's becoming easier and easier to publish in mainstream journals.
What's the relationship to that with the decline in religion?
Public opinion polls in the United States have, and in Europe too, but particularly the US, have shown upwards of 25% self-professed Christians believe in reincarnation. So it's the church and officially that denies it, but the people, for whatever reason, I do not reject it.
So, wait, can you help me here? So, if consciousness exists outside of the body, what does that mean?
That would mean that our brains, our bodies work with the consciousness. The consciousness is outside, and the conscious interfaces with the brain, interfaces with the body, right? And so when they're looking at the brain and seeing different parts of the brain light up under certain conditions, what they're not seeing where consciousness comes alive so much as they're seeing the points at which consciousness interfaces with the brain.
And how does AI fit into this?
Yeah, well, it doesn't really relate at all. I mean, in what way were you thinking?
I don't know. Can it capture consciousness or like can it replicate? Like, how does that fit in or could it fit in?
Well, there's a lot of talk about this, and can you imagine hybrids? Organic AI robot hybrids, and I mean, this stuff is still science fiction, and I don't know that it'll ever go anywhere into science reality, but there are people who talk about it. Their philosophers talk about it. They, being where you are, even when you're in Southern California,
Uh-huh.
yeah, I'm sure you hear a lot of this sort of stuff, and so
Well, I'm so glad you asked this question, Reshma. I'm recording in this studio and there's like an AI conference happening downstairs in the same building. Of course, you can't not talk about AI, but am I getting your question right that you're essentially asking like if I were talking to my chat GPT and like, looking up questions and doing research, if all of a sudden it was like, hey, Tanya, I'm so and so from a past life and I speak this language actually. Do you remember me? Like is that kind of what you're getting at, Resh?
Yeah, a little bit of that. Yeah. Or if some, I don't know, I just also feel like if a consciousness is something outside my body, cannot be controlled or manipulated in any way. I'm just so like I'm just struggling of like what is the consciousness if the consciousness isn't God? Because I think when you talk about that, Jim, I think about the fact that that's like the ultimate, you know what I mean, kind of puppeteer is in my is Krishna in our life in my religion.
yeah, I mean, the way I talk about it is not that far different from the way consciousness is talked about in Hinduism, right?
Yeah.
Forgive me for not knowing this, but again, your book didn't arrive in time, so we're starting from zero. Do you study reincarnation in animals? Is that something that we see? And I ask also because Reshma,
Yes.
had a pet that passed away that was her
Who I
first
call
baby.
my soul dog. Yes.
Her soul
right.
dog, Stanley. And Stanley passed away a year or two ago, I think. And we all
yeah.
love Stanley. And so I just, I'm curious if people have experienced. I also I adopted a puppy about a year and a half ago, and I brought her home to visit my parents. And my parents said, "Oh my gosh, she has the same behaviors, the same eyes, like of our dog from 6-7 years ago. It is uncanny." Is this something that you've seen or studied?
Yeah, actually.
Okay.
Tell us everything.
And let me ask you, as a entry into this, did the puppy recognize things in your parents' home? Did she know where the food was and things like this?
No, but I'm going to go back and ask them now because we lived in a different house at this point. So we had moved. So there wouldn't be any kind of like locational
Okay.
reference.
I mean, I could talk about for me, for my dog Stanley. I felt like and then when people call their dogs their soul dogs, like we just knew each other. She
Yeah.
kind of knew when I was upset, or when something was about to happen, or just there was a sense of real familiarity. Like I actually thought she was like a child of mine or in a past life, right? But we had we were on the same wavelength. And look, I have another dog now who I love, but it's not like that. You know what I mean? It's not the same feeling that I had, or connection, I should say, or like, it's like the sense of familiarity. Like, I know you, we've walked this earth before.
I've studied most intensively what are called after-death communications involving animals. And they turn out to be very, very similar to human after-death communications. These are things like, having dreams of the animals, feeling their presence, this type of thing. I've collected a lot of the reincarnation accounts too, but haven't yet written about them. What is fascinating about both the after-death communications and the reincarnation things is how similar they are to the human accounts. With the animal stuff, it's the same sorts of signs that we see with the humans. So like with human cases, it's recognitions of people, right? Same with the animals, recognizing people or recognizing places, right? Certain behaviors that are distinctive that carry over, and the same with the animals. So again, and the dreams, these sort of announcing dreams, as we call them, these are dreams that generally a pregnant woman, but sometimes before she becomes pregnant, or maybe her husband or somebody close to her, will have a dream about the person who's going to be reincarnated. We see this with animals too. So on point after point after point, we see the same things going on with animals as we do with people.
Huh.
Wow.
Now, the reason I got interested in this is because theoretically, I mean, one of the things you have to ask is, when did reincarnation start? All right.
Okay.
Did it start with human beings? And if so, where along the human line did it start? Well, it seemed to me that if it, obviously it had to start somewhere. the most logical point for me is when life began. Okay. As soon as there was death, there was reincarnation. Now, that implies that all life reincarnates, right? Okay.
Yes.
And if that is true, then we should see with animals exactly what we see with animals.
And it would track though, which is what my guru would say to me, is that animals though won't come back as humans. Animals come back as animals. Like just like right? We like you're saying that most people kind of stay in the same.
But that's still my same sense that reincarnation is typically, if not always, within species lines. But with animals, it can cross breeds very often, both with cats and dogs. But there are also a lot of these animal cases of what I call transmigration as opposed to reincarnation. Transmigration is across species lines, reincarnation within species. Um, and so I've collected a lot of them too, and they need to be analyzed and they need to be understood. And I don't see as much good evidence for that happening as I do for within species reincarnation.
But I see what you're saying, Jim, is that, it started somewhere, right? And if we have evolved from apes, from animals, from whatever we've evolved from, then presumably at some point we were microorganisms, right? So or dinosaurs or whatever it may be. And so
we go back far enough, right?
Yeah, we've reincarnated along the evolutionary line. So not necessarily between species, but kind of, right?
Yeah, well, when one species dies out, you have to go into the next. My rule of thumb has been, we know that different species can interbreed sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Not always effectively. Sometimes the offspring can have children, other times they can't. So my rule sort of has been reincarnation may be sort of the same way, right? Our consciousness may be able to control some bodies of other species, but if they're too different from the species that we're accustomed to, then no. But you mentioned microorganisms, and this is very interesting because there's a growing amount of research showing that even bacteria, single-celled organisms, can learn. If they can learn, they can remember. That puts a total lie to memories being in the brain.
Because they don't have brains.
There's just no way that memories can be in the brain if you've got microorganisms, single cell bacteria, and other single cell organisms remembering, And so that's one of the things that sort of puts it in consciousness, right?
Yeah.
Now, the materialists still like to see this as a chemical sort of thing and all this, and they still want to see in this material this way. But it at least makes one wonder if, in fact, there is this, thing. And the people who do this, who are doing this study, unabashedly say that they have evidence that they're not just remembering, but they're conscious in some sense, that they are deliberately taking certain actions. This is incredible to think about, right?
That's surreal.
It's incredible.
But we really have to get away of the idea that we humans are so unique. We're not. We're animals too, and we're just at the end of this evolution. Or, we're further, all animals have evolved, right? For as long as we've evolved, and just some of them have stayed with certain forms, whereas we've, moved on to what we have now. That doesn't mean we're at the end of anything. We're where we are now. So, but we have to realize that we're all part of this whole thing, right?
The same thing. We're not all that different.
We're not all that different.